Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Patryk Witkowski and I am joined today by William Duguid, an activist, a writer, and a regular on the show.
Hello, good to see you, Patrick.
Nice to see you too. We're starting today with Ukraine update, day 651. Volodymyr Zelensky cancelled a planned address to U.S. senators on Tuesday, with Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer announcing the president would not be able to attend the classified briefing because something came up at the last minute. The Ukrainian president had been expected to speak to senators over Zoom. The news came a day after the White House sent an urgent warning that Kiev's war efforts to defend itself from Russia's invasion may grind to a halt without further U.S. military and economic assistance. The Biden administration is urging Congress to approve billions of dollars in support for Ukraine. Schumer said the administration had invited Zelensky to address the senators as they could hear directly from him precisely what's at stake. If Ukraine falls, Putin will keep going, Schumer said on Monday. Autocrats around the world will be emboldened. Democracy, this grand and noble experiment, will enter an era of decline. Vladimir Putin traveled to the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia to discuss the Israeli-Hamas war on Wednesday, on only his fifth trip abroad since the International Criminal Courts issued an arrest warrant for him in March. Neither the UAE nor Saudi Arabia have signed the ICC's founding treaty, which means they would not have to arrest them. 6 children will be returned to Ukraine from Russia under a deal brokered by Qatar. According to Qatari officials, the children are en route to Ukraine via Moscow, the source said. This is the second phase of a Qatar-mediated return of children, after 4 minors were returned in October. UK Foreign Secretary David Cameron has told the House of Lords that there will be no reduction in UK military support for Ukraine in 2024. At least 2 people were killed and 1 wounded after Russian forces struck the sovereign city of Kherson, the head of the office of the Ukrainian presidency said. Regional prosecutors opened a war crimes investigation into one of the strikes, which occurred at about 9 a.m. and killed a 48-year-old man and a woman who had not yet been identified. The Russian Defense Ministry had claimed to have downed a total of 41 Ukraine-launched drones on Tuesday. Ukrainian authorities have said that the Ukrainian military shot down 10 out of the 17 attack drones launched by Russia on Tuesday. The governor of Ukraine's western Lviv region, Maxim Kozitsky, said 3 drones had struck an unspecified infrastructure target, causing a fire, but damage had been minimal and no casualties had been reported. That concludes the Ukraine update. William, do you have any thoughts, anything you'd want to share on the topic?
Well, obviously, this has now been going on for a while, and the events of any one particular day maybe don't tell us that much about what's really happening. But it's interesting to see that Putin is in his pomp with his visit to the UAE, where they can't touch him because the UAE doesn't recognize the International Criminal Court. So he can do that fairly safely, a fairly rare appearance, and he seems to be garnering as much support as he can. He's on maneuvers, you might say. At the same time, just I'm not entirely sure what the significance of, quote, something coming up for Zelensky before meeting with the US senators is all about, because obviously it's a fairly key engagement for Zelensky, because there is just the slightest sign that with the distraction of other things going on in Gaza and elsewhere, perhaps, that US support may be beginning to fray and that Congress may be becoming less willing to support with funding for what's required. And that could be critical at this juncture in the war, because we're in a kind of stalemate situation right now where Ukraine was fighting back, but that seems to have stalled, and now it's in a tit for tat phase. And there is a danger that the tide could turn the other way while the world is perhaps looking elsewhere, and the US is one of the major components there. So Nothing conclusive, but those are two things that sort of stick in my mind, that Putin seems to be in the up, and we're not sure what's happening with Zelensky right now, and that could be troubling.
Thank you. Also, Linda, in case you're saying anything, I don't hear anything on the microphone. Oh, gotcha. I'm sorry. My bad. Okay, so sorry about that. Moving on to the updates on Israel and Gaza. The Gaza Health Ministry has reported that Israel has killed at least 16,248 people, including 7,111 children and 4,885 women in Gaza since the 7th of October. There are reported to be more than 7,600 people missing. Earlier this week, an unnamed Israeli military source told news agencies it estimated that 15,000 people had been killed, with 5,000 of them being combatants. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has written to the UN Security Council, warning public order is set to break down in Gaza completely, and there is no means of getting aid over the border into Gaza. He has intervened using his powers under Article 99 of the UN Charter that allows him to bring to the UN's attention any event that threatens the security of the world. His move is designed to put pressure on the US to direct Israel to let aid cross over from Egypt into Gaza. The US claimed it had reached such an agreement last week and since has fended off complaints that its agreement has not been honored by Israel. Some Arab foreign ministries, including the Egyptian foreign minister, have traveled to New York to demand action. In his letter, Guterres wrote that the capacity of the UN to act has been decimated by supply shortages, lack of fuel, interrupted communications, and the lack of security. The UN and aid agencies say nowhere in Gaza is safe anymore. According to the UN, 1.87 million people, more than 80% of Gaza's population, have left their homes. Many had to flee shelter several times in the path of the Israeli advance. UN Human Rights Chief Volker Turk has warned of a heightened risk of atrocity crimes in Gaza, urging parties involved to refrain from committing such violations. Israeli forces and Hamas are fighting house-to-house battles along the length of the Gaza Strip, with devastating consequences for civilian population amid a complete collapse in humanitarian relief. The focal points of the fighting over the last 2 days have been the Jabalia refugee camp and the Shujia district in northern Gaza and the Khan Yunis and Bani Suhaila in the south. The IDF has taken control of most of Salah al-Din Road, the main north-south highway running down the middle of a coastal strip. Israel's military has claimed it struck at approximately 250 terror targets in the Gaza Strip over the last day, including targeting what it claimed was Hamas activity located at schools. The Israeli army has said the International Committee of the Red Cross must have access to the hostages still held by Hamas in Gaza Strip. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the Israeli military will retain open-ended security control over the Gaza Strip long after its war against Hamas ends. Israel's military said it intercepted a surface-to-surface missile launched towards Eilat in southern Israel today. Cyprus says a number of countries have offered to store humanitarian assistance in the East Mediterranean island nation as part of a plan to ship the aid to Gaza via a maritime corridor. Russia's President Vladimir Putin has visited the UAE and Saudi Arabia. The conflict in Gaza has said to be on agenda for the talks. U.S. President Joe Biden has denounced the reported rape and sexual violence committed against Israeli girls and women by Hamas militants during the 7th October attack on Israel, calling on the world to condemn such conduct without equivocation and without exception. Opening the floor to you again, William.
Well, it's a continuation now of the second phase of the war after what turned out to be a humanitarian pause of 7 days, and the news isn't really getting any better. We have now, I think Antonio Guterres is getting really fairly shrill now in his warnings of what's going on. Invoking Article 99, I'm sure, is no small thing. It's the article that permits him to call the Security Council's attention to things that actually threaten the security of the world. And the long-term breakdown of civil society in Gaza, I think is pretty near inevitable now, because the Gazans have been subjected to, as much as anything, psychological warfare, with a constant threat of bombardment, with the ceasefire never been quite sure of how long it would last, and also with the patent nonsense that they should be able to move around to avoid trouble, to numbered zones, and that is just pure psychological warfare, and it will take its toll. I do think that the death count is probably a serious underestimate. You mentioned 7,600 people missing. I'm sure there are other problems going on with disease and other things, and indeed with the inability of the infrastructure to cope with the injured. And so that is obviously a huge concern. And at the minute, I cannot see any good outcome to this. I would just mention the allegations of sexual violence as well. If that did indeed take place, that's absolutely to be condemned. And we must be absolutely right about that. I do think, though, that President Biden remains very one-sided in the things he chooses to pick out as needing comment. And much more serious is the humanitarian collapse. This, I don't see how it can be fixed. I think the effects will last for decades and will have the seeds of future problems. And this is as a result of the world ignoring a situation for 75 years or more. And in a sense, it's a shame on all governments.
Thank you. Moving on to COP28, 5 important natural thresholds already risk being crossed. According to the Global Tipping Points report, and 3 more may be reached in the 2030s if the world heats 1.5 degrees above the pre-industrial temperatures. Triggering these planetary shifts will not cause temperatures to spiral out of control in the coming centuries, but will unleash dangerous and sweeping damages to people and nature that cannot be undone. The tipping points at risk include the collapse of big ice sheets in Greenland and the West Antarctic, the widespread thawing of the permafrost and death of coral reefs in warm waters, and the collapse of one oceanic current in the North Atlantic. The Tipping Point report, produced by an international team of 200 researchers and funded by Bezos Earth Fund, is the latest in the series of warnings about the most extreme effects of climate change. Scientists have warned that some of the shifts can create feedback loops that heat the planet further or alter weather patterns in a way that trigger from tipping points. On his return from COP28, First Minister Hamza Yousaf convened with the first meeting for the Scottish Energy Advisory Board, SEAB, since taking on the role of the University of Strathclyde. The First Minister urged the UK government to ensure that grid investment matches the pace of Scotland's net zero ambition, while delivering a just transition for communities and the energy workforce. He also emphasized the importance of collaboration between government and the energy industry. The First Minister said, "Scotland is at a pivotal point in the energy transition, and although we have already made great strides towards net zero, there is still more to do to maximize our enormous renewables potential as we make the move away from fossil fuels. As we do so, we must ensure the transition is fair and just for the communities and workers who depend on the energy sector. It is clear that significant investment is needed to ensure the grid does not become a barrier to net zero. Grid investment must proceed at the pace and scale required to enable the full use of current and future renewables capacity through projects like ScotWind." While we welcome recent developments from the UK government on electricity infrastructure, the Scottish government must be involved closely as plans develop to ensure they deliver on the promise to speed up the connections process, upgrade the grid, and provide lasting benefits for communities. Realizing the vision of our draft energy strategy and just transition plan will deliver affordable, secure, and clean energy, and benefit communities across Scotland by providing high-quality jobs and economic opportunities. The views of these consulted, including across the energy sector and those with whom I met today, are vitally important. We are taking the time needed to respond to the views they have expressed.
Well, yes, some good comments there from Hamza Youssef about what's required. Unfortunately, while we are part of the UK structure, we are entirely beholden to the UK in terms of them making the investment that's required in the whole infrastructure, and the the funds that would be needed to enable a proper just transition. And I have to say, I really am not convinced that the UK government's heart is in a just transition right now. There's much too much concentration on the new oil and gas and how to exploit that. And I can't see any change, certainly with the current government, and I'm not entirely convinced about what Labour's view of it would be either. It's all kicking the can down the road. And that is in the context, of course, of the conversation we were having earlier about tipping points. Your report, quite rightly, saying we actually don't know where we are in the process. Tipping points have a habit of being quite sudden changes. And we are already seeing in so many places in the world the effects, most recently in India with a flood, but in our own floods just here in Scotland, and how they compared with what we'd seen previously. And ever more catastrophic climate events happening, it could well be that the tipping point has already been reached, and we could have a horrible shock coming. And that has all sorts of consequences for the world economy, for the security of the world as peoples move across continents to move to places that are inhabitable. And so, yeah, COP28 has its work cut out to come up with something that actually properly reflects a determination to change this and to reverse it, to mitigate in terms of getting the emissions down, and to adapt, and also to provide loss and damage to those countries whose fault it isn't that they're suffering these consequences, because they had no input into the causes. But loss and damage, to support them properly. And right now, the loss and damage fund, in my view, is far too small, and much, much more is required. I mean, we're down at less than 1% of the requirement. And so sweeping changes, and it becomes ever more urgent.
Thank you. For the UK COVID inquiry, Boris Johnson has been giving evidence at the UK's public inquiry into the COVID-19 pandemic, where he was questioned on the decisions he made as Prime Minister during that time. Johnson was Prime Minister for 3 years, from 2019 until he resigned in disgrace in September 2022 after a series of scandals, including reports that he and other officials had been present at alcohol-fueled gatherings during 2020 and 2021 at Downing Street, the official residences and offices of Britain's Prime Minister. The outcomes of the inquiry will have implications both for Johnson's legacy and, potentially, for the current Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, who served under Johnson as Chancellor of the Exchequer during the pandemic. Sunak is due to give evidence to the inquiry later this month. Johnson began his evidence by issuing an apology for what he described as the pain and loss of his suffering. During the pandemic, however, four people staged a protest inside the inquiry, saying that they didn't want his apology, before being ordered to be removed by Lady Hallett, the chair of the inquiry. Johnson then parroted Matt Hancock by saying that there were mixed messages from the UK government and the devolved administrations of Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. Johnson defended Matt Hancock, who was Health Secretary for much of the pandemic, despite sharp criticism by others in the government and internal calls to sack him. Johnson admitted that he and Whitehall, more generally, failed to understand the seriousness of a pandemic in late January and February 2020. Asked why information on 29 January about the virus spreading outside China did not become a light bulb moment, Johnson said, "I don't think that we were able to comprehend the implications of what we were actually looking at. The problem was that I don't think we attached enough credence to those forecasts, and because of the experience that we'd had with other zoonotic diseases, I think collectively in Whitehall, there was not a sufficiently loud enough klaxon." He referred to the experience of previous crises, such as severe acute respiratory syndrome, SARS, which died out before reaching the UK. Before Johnson's evidence began, the chair of the inquiry, Lady Hallett, complained about media briefings about what he would tell the inquiry.
Shall I go?
I was wondering, looking at the COVID inquiry, any thoughts on Boris Johnson and his statements?
Yeah. Well, Boris Johnson has clearly been coached, and as Lady Hallett mentioned, he leaked his evidence to the press, so he was getting his defence in first, so to speak. Of course, it's not a matter of prosecution and defence. It should be, and indeed is, a way of learning so that we don't go through the same problems again. It's relatively early days in what he's got to say, and tomorrow will be equally interesting when he comes back for another grilling. Um, Largely, I think he blustered his way through it today with maybe just the odd hint of tetchiness. I think his opening apologies did rather fall flat, and I know there were some fairly caustic comments by Amer Anwar of the Scottish COVID families, bereaved families group about it. I think the words disgusting orgy of narcissism were mentioned in that. And of course, he's also echoed, as you said, Matt Hancock in taking a swipe at the Scottish Government and indeed the other devolved governments, but seemingly principally keeping his eye for the Scottish Government. I'm not quite sure where that comes from, because mixed messaging was largely because, I think, of the poor communication and lack of involvement of the devolved governments by the UK government. And Nicola Sturgeon actually, when she made her broadcasts, was in a sense steadying the ship and providing perhaps even some English viewers with an idea that there was a steady hand on the tiller, rather than some of the more hysterical broadcasts that were being done from London. So I don't know. I think that nobody truly believes that the mixed messaging was down to the devolved governments. And I think that is going to turn out to be one of the main issues with the way the pandemic was conducted once the seriousness of it was recognised. As for not picking up on it beforehand, I think they were lulled into a false sense of security by SARS and MERS dying out before they ever became pandemics. And in fact, the only true pandemic there had been in the previous 100 years had been Spanish flu, almost exactly 100 years beforehand. But I don't want to sort of second guess what will be the eventual results of a very, very detailed and comprehensive inquiry. But I think one thing that we really need to recognise is that we were not prepared, and we had the capacity to be prepared. If anything, I think the government in the UK step back from true pandemic preparation and stockpiling of what was required. And I think that is a lesson that will have to be learned in the future, when, God forbid, and it almost certainly will, another pandemic takes place.
Thank you. Moving on to the topic of child poverty, new UNICEF report ranks the UK in last place for reducing child poverty. A new report from UNICEF has ranked the UK in last place The damning report highlighted that the UK saw a 20% increase in child poverty between 2014 and 2021. At the same time, countries such as Slovenia, Latvia, and Lithuania saw a 30% reduction in child poverty. It comes just a day after the End Poverty Coalition revealed that the Tory two-child benefit cap is one of the biggest drivers of child poverty in the UK, and that scrapping it would lift 250,000 children, 15,000 of which in Scotland, out of poverty. The overall UNICEF ranking is based on the rate of child income poverty in each country and their success in reducing child income poverty. This saw the UK in 37th place, ahead of just Turkey and Colombia. Commenting, the SNP spokesperson for Women and Equalities, Kirsten Oswald, MP, said, "This report lays bare the damaging impact of 13 years of Tory rule, consecutive Westminster governments, which Scotland didn't vote for, have repeatedly prioritised austerity and support for the rich over efforts to tackle rising rates of child poverty and support families, showing exactly why Scotland needs independence. And what's worrying is that Sir Keir Starmer has confirmed a Labour government would continue down the same path. Labour have signed up to Tory tax and spending plans and austerity, including keeping the poverty-inducing two-child cap that is impacting over 87,000 children in Scotland. The Scottish Government is doing what it can to tackle child poverty, such as freezing council tax and introducing the Scottish Child Payment, which has lifted 90,000 child out of poverty. But the reality is that whilst 85% of welfare spending and key powers remain reserved to Westminster, Scotland's action will continue to be undermined." Extending on that note, I was wondering, William, what are your thoughts on this dynamic between the UK and Scotland, and is Scotland being held back by UK governments and UK legislation?
Well, I think Scotland's limited in what it can do, but the child payment is pretty well a game changer in terms of what it can do, and it has been hailed as such by authorities such as Danny Dorling. I do believe that an independent Scottish government would be in a position, particularly if it had control over currency, a position where it could actually invest properly in the economy and perhaps reverse some of the redistribution of wealth, which has gone very much from the poor to the rich in recent years, but maybe equalize that and certainly shore up some of the areas in which people are suffering poverty. So I think that is a dynamic, and obviously I'm a wee bit biased, so I would say that, but I do think the evidence is that the UK approach simply is not working and is in fact resulting in increased destitution, as the Joseph Rowntree Foundation said not too long ago. So I don't see much change coming, even if there is a change in government, because Keir Starmer appears just to want to emulate Tory policies, maybe with a slightly more humane face, perhaps marks for artistic merit. And until that changes, I don't see anything coming from the UK side. And of course, it's only 13 years ago or so that the then Labour government was talking about halving child poverty, cutting it by half in 10 years. That, of course, has not happened, and quite the reverse has happened. And this is actually a damning set of statistics from UNICEF. And there's not really much more one can say except that roll on the day when we do get a chance to change this.
90% of manufacturers face trading hurdles 3 years after Brexit. A new report has found that 9 out of 10 UK manufacturers are still facing difficulties trading with the EU 3 years after Brexit. The survey by trade body Make UK shows that there has been little improvement since its first post-Brexit survey in 2021, with 40% of surveyed businesses saying export volumes to the EU were falling. and 36% of UK companies saying EU companies were less willing to work with them. After businesses expressed concern over the impact new border controls will have on imports from the EU, starting in January 2024, Make UK also warned that the new measures were likely to create additional friction. The UK government confirmed in October that new post-Brexit border checks will cost the UK businesses at least £330 million a year. Commenting, the SNP's Europe and EU session spokesperson Ellen Smith MP said, Westminster's Brexit, which Scotland didn't vote for, has cost Scottish businesses hundreds of millions and left them struggling to trade with our biggest trading partner. With the Tories, Labour and Lib Dems all now backing Brexit, the damage to Scotland's businesses, economy, public services and households will continue if Scotland remains under Westminster control. Leaving the EU will be an unmitigated disaster, and everyone knows it. Independence allows Scotland to escape Brexit and gives us the route back to the EU and the world's largest single market. The UK, on that, William, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's no great surprise that 3 years on there are problems. But what's worrying is that the problems that companies are having are taking place before the full implementation of the new border regulations, which of course is a can that keeps getting kicked down the road. Already, Brexit is just proving to be a monstrous act of self-sabotage. And it's as much a question of perceptions as anything else, because there are ways to get around the regulations or to comply with regulations as they now are, but they're hard work and they're more expensive, and it's just not worth the candle for many European companies with which our companies would wish to trade. The UK is in a box marked too difficult. And therefore, whereas you might be able to preserve existing business relationships, you have all manner of problems in perhaps creating new business relationships, which are what you need to grow as a company. There's also the situation where, of course, there are staffing problems being caused by the removal of freedom of movement. And if anything, the UK government's plans seem to be to make that even harder to achieve in the coming years. So again, I don't see any particular way out of this. And of course, once again, Keir Starmer is just saying, we'll do much the same, only we'll do it better. I think eventually with the UK, sanity will come in, and it might not be for 5 or for 10 years, but in some way, we're going to have to get back. The UK is going to have to get back into the single market. I would very much hope that by the time they do, Scotland has already pointed the way by becoming independent and forging a relationship with a single market. And personally, I don't care whether it's full EU membership, however long that may take, or whether it's EFTA as a stepping stone, or whether it's associate membership. We just need to get the trading relationship without the barriers. And that's the biggest thing that would fix things for us. So let's again hope that day comes soon.
Yeah, the UK government has been accused of failing to get a grip of food inflation in the UK. New analysis has revealed that the UK is the only G7 economy where food prices continue to rise by more than 10%. In contrast, food inflation across the 38 nations, the Organization for Economic Cooperation Development, the OECD, monitor that inflation across on average, has slowed to 7.4% in October. Commenting on this, the SNP's economy spokesperson, Drew Hendry MP, said, Westminster's failure to get a grip of a cost of living crisis has left households right across these aisles struggling to make it through the month. The Chancellor did nothing in his autumn statement to help families facing their most expensive food bills ever, despite our demands to act and work with food producers and retailers to secure lower prices. Whilst other countries have acted to help households facing a food bill crisis, the UK government refused. Through no fault of their own, families in Scotland were paying a heavy price for Westminster's incompetence and a broken Brexit, which is now championed by Sir Keir Starmer's Labour Party. I was wondering, William, what do you think are the key things holding the UK for in such different like economic situations compared to other OECD countries?
Well, there are a number of things that spring to mind. Brexit is one. The London School of Economics suggested that Brexit had added almost £6 billion to UK food bills in the 2 years to the end of 2021. And part of the reason for that would be things like supply chain issues with delivery times and import costs up. And we've just talked about the difficulty of trade between companies here and companies in the EU. Another one is the soaring energy bills, where the Ofgem price cap in the UK hasn't featured elsewhere to anything like the same extent. And so there are sort of cliff edges every time the energy prices change. And that has an impact down the line on inflation. So then do the pay demands that come to bridge the gap, and they themselves are potentially inflationary. We also have worker shortages, again, a consequence of Brexit, and that drives costs up as well. Um, and despite the net migration rate seemingly being greater than the Tory government would hope. So all of these things are part of what I called before a monstrous act of self-sabotage. And I think that's one of the reasons why when problems hit, because they were universal problems, but we are more prone to suffer from them than are other countries. So that attitude from government needs to change, and there does need to be more support, and there needs to be more recognition of what the problems are and trying to deal with them.
Moving to America, Kash Patel, an ally of Donald Trump, who worked in his Justice Department, has said that if the ex-president is elected again, his administration will retaliate against people in the media for criminality against people. Oh, it will retaliate against people in the media, both criminally or either criminally or civilly. Sorry. Patel, who was also Chief of Staff in the Defense Department and held a role on the National Security Council, made the comment on Steve Bannon's podcast. He said that in a second Trump administration, we will go out and find conspirators, not just in government, but in the media, over the 2020 election, which Trump lost to Joe Biden. Trump and his allies have repeatedly claimed the election was stolen, despite the fact that numerous federal and local officials, a long list of courts, top former campaign staffers, and even his own attorney general have all said there's no evidence of the fraud he alleges. Trump has also promised retribution as a central part of the campaign message as he seeks a second term in the White House. In a Fox News channel interview later on Tuesday, sorry. Yeah. Yeah, Trump declined twice to say he would not abuse power or seek retribution in a Trump declined twice to say he would not abuse power to seek retribution in a second White House term. In his interview with Bannon, Patel said, "We're going to come after the people in the media who lied about American citizens who helped Joe Biden rig presidential elections. We're going to come after you, whether it's criminally or civilly. We'll figure that out. But yeah, we're putting you all on notice." In the interview, Bannon suggested Patel might be a possible director of the CIA if Trump wins another term. Patel was a guest at Trump's kickoff for his 2024 presidential campaign last year in Mar-a-Lago Resort in Florida. In June, he attended Trump's speech at his Bedminster resort following the former president's appearance in court on federal charges he mishandled classified documents. William, extending to your thoughts on America and the situation with cases ongoing on Trump.
My expertise in America, yes. This could really get very ugly because Trump is sort of skirting around using words such as, well, fake news he's always used, enemy of the people. is a thing that's come up, and that's almost Stalin-esque. Vermin, that's reminiscent of Hitler, for goodness sake. Treason, it's a form of country-threatening treason. What the NBC News and the MSNBC have been saying about the election and this apparent stealing of the election for which there is zero evidence. And it's a problem going forward because one can't see the result of the 2024 election being accepted by Trump should he lose. And there is a strong possibility at this time that he'll win. And if it is going to then be about retribution and harassment, that really could turn things, as I said, very, very ugly indeed. And so I don't hold out very great hope for the immediate future of the US because it's become such a polarized society. And there seems now to be this attachment to Trump as a demagogue. And one keeps harking back to the sight of him when he was first arrested. And there was the mugshot of him, as you will recall, which just poured rage out of his face. And it was a kind of, how dare they do this to me? And he's determined not to be a martyr, but being a victim, victimhood is a thing that will drive him and will drive his supporters to support him in his retribution. So not a healthy situation at all.
The Scottish Government has announced for reopening of the Independent Living Fund following a debate on championing disability equality and human rights in Holyrood yesterday. The announcement has been welcomed as an important step towards ensuring that those with complex needs can lead independent lives. Following an announcement in the First Minister's programme for government, the fund will reopen on April 2024 with £9 million of initial funding to enable up to 1,000 disabled people to lead truly independent lives. The fund was first opened in 2015 as a replacement for a UK government fund of the same name, which was closed under austerity measures in 2010. The Scottish Government Fund currently supports around 2,000 people with a lifetime award worth around £500 per week. Commenting, SNP MSP Kevin Stewart said, "On the week of the UN International Day of Persons with Disabilities 2023, it is important to highlight the support available in Scotland for those with complex needs, safeguarding the ability of thousands to live independently and easing the financial cost that comes with these conditions. The Independent Living Fund is rooted in the principle that disabled people should be supported in living the life they want, where they want to live it. And the Scottish Government is committed to making that a reality for as many people as possible. Disabled people must have freedom, dignity, choice, and control over their lives, and the SNP are working to make that a reality." William, I was wondering, how do you feel the SNP does in its efforts to help disabled people and other groups in need?
As with everything else, I think the intention is there to have a humane and progressive support for people in that situation and in many other situations. But again, the ability to do too much about it is limited. It's clearly more of a priority for the Scottish Government than it is for the UK Government, who closed down their Independent Living Fund in 2010. And then Scotland eventually was in a position where, in a small way, it could keep supporting those folks who had been getting money from the UK fund through 3,000 of them to start with in July 2015. And they've not really been able to expand it because the resources have not been there. That 3,000 has now gone down to, I think, about 2,000, largely because many of those who were getting the support have died during that time. But now there's a move forward. And again, it's limited funds, but it will enable it to be open from next spring to new claimants again. And that will make a bit of a difference. But it's all part of the general attitude, I think, of the Scottish Government, which is very different from the current UK angle, and that is the well-being economy and all aspects of that. That includes not just supporting those who are just getting on in society, but those who can't for one reason or another, who are held back, be it by disability or by something else, to support them in whatever way enables them to make something of their lives, and to do so independently. So I think it's a good thing. I wish we could do more, and maybe one day we will do more. But at least for now, we have a positive move.
In a new paper published today by Cabinet Secretary for Social Justice Shirley Ann Somerville, the Scottish Government say that independence would give Scotland the opportunity to take a new approach to social security designed to be fairer, more dignified and more respectful. The ninth paper in the Building a New Scotland series, Social Security is an independent Scotland, sets out how the UK government holds the majority of social security powers, including low income and working wage benefits. The paper evidences negative impacts of the UK government's current welfare policies on poverty levels, outlines the progress the Scottish government has already made in creating a fairer system with limited powers, and demonstrates how an independent Scotland could go even further. These include supporting and protecting everyone who needs financial help and support at any point in their lives, introducing early reforms to universal credit, removing the bedroom tax, benefit cap, two-child limit, rape clause, and a young adult penalty, which have all been introduced by the UK government. Working alongside wider labour markets, health and social policies to create a stronger and more dynamic economy like comparable European countries, stopping the rollout of changes to delivery of reserved ill health and disability benefits introduced as a result of the UK government's Health and Disability White Paper, moving towards a new system grounded in adequacy, such as a minimum income guarantee to ensure that everyone could have a decent level of income and live with dignity. Ms. Somerville said, "With independence, we believe Scotland can do better. With limited powers, the Scottish Government has already demonstrated that things can be done differently, with an approach to social security that treats people with dignity, fairness, and respect." An estimated 90,000 fewer children are expected to live in relative and absolute poverty this year as a result of actions we have taken. With the powers of an independent nation, Scotland could do more to make our system fair and move away from the UK government system to benefit freezes, caps, and punishments. We could move away from the UK government system that offers inadequate levels of financial support and is pushing people into poverty. The best performing countries, independent countries, comparable to Scotland, demonstrate that a strong social safety net is a foundation of a dynamic, innovative, and productive economy, rather than a barrier to it. We can become a stronger, fairer, and more generous and more prosperous country. This government believes that independence is the best route of getting there. On note of UK government immigration, Robert Jenrick has announced his resignation on Twitter. Okay, gotcha. Going back a note, talking about the safety nets and social security for an independent Scotland. Talk to me about that, William.
Well, the latest in a series of papers, and now there's quite a volume of papers about how independent Scotland would look, as indeed the current Scottish government sees it. This is the ninth. So it's a long-term project to build up social security, even under independence, because of, I think, the damage that's been created in the UK system. It's almost a case of build it up from scratch. But the early days are important in terms of transitioning from the UK way of doing things to the Scottish way of doing things, which again is grounded in the well-being economy. And we've seen some of the things that would be early priorities come up earlier in the conversation, the two-child limit and the bedroom tax, which are important in terms of child poverty, removing those barriers and actually paying people adequately to survive in the economy. Boosting take up of benefits is important because they're not fully taken up within the UK, possibly because of the barriers placed in the way by the UK government. It's almost a hostile environment for people who require social security. Very important too, rolling back as early as possible the changes in UK law as regards work capability, that were such a feature of the autumn statement, and which so many people found particularly threatening and demoralising. That those have got to go, and we've got to get to the point where we support people properly. As you said, comparator countries, countries of similar size, know fine that looking after people properly when they need looked after is the way you underpin a dynamic economy. You don't throw them to the wolves. The UK is an outlier, and it's been getting worse. And I pray for the day when it gets better. But until then, this is a pretty good set of packages from what I've seen. I've mostly read the comment about it. I haven't had time to read the paper yet. But it's part of a growing body of what will go into an independence campaign, so that there won't be any question about what an independent Scotland will look like. You might disagree with it, but it'll be there and it'll be part of the campaign. And those discussions really need to be starting, and we need to be getting that discussion out to the people in the street who right now are fed up with the whole system. And we need to be able to tell them, look, there is hope, there is a plan, and there is a way in which we can make life better for ourselves.
And now for the story. And for the story that I rudely tried to jump to earlier, the UK government, breaking news, just happening right now as we speak. The UK government immigration officer, Robert Jenrick, has announced his resignation on Twitter, currently known as X. Jenrick said, "It is with great sadness that I have written to the Prime Minister to tender my resignation as Minister for Immigration. I cannot continue in my position when I have such strong disagreements with the direction of the government's policy on immigration." So, William,
Will I catch this wild card? Oh my, yeah. I suspect Jenrick, I suspect, is not wanting the regime for immigration to be made any easier for prospective immigrants. I suspect that he thinks maybe Rishi Sunak doesn't mean it about Rwanda, and he wants to make it stick. So I suspect that's where his disagreement lies. We need to maybe hear a wee bit more over the next couple of days and see what other folks think about it. But my view is that this is not necessarily going to lead to any greater fate for those who wish to come and make their life here in the UK. But we shall have to see. That's what I do with wild cards. I just talk off the top of my head.
there are other conservative members that think that maybe the Rwanda plan is going too far, and they don't agree with the government's position on it. Will we see more people dropping out? Will the Conservative Party change in their rhetoric around that? Or what do you imagine happening?
I think the Conservative Party will do what it feels is the best thing to survive as best it can in the next election, because right now they're in for an absolute drubbing. It looks to me as if in recent months and weeks they have gone for the far right as a way of dog whistling people into voting for them as the bastion of British values, and it's very anti-immigrant, and it's pulling up the drawbridge. Now, whether that remains the case or whether their polling tells them it should go another way, um, we will just have to see. But right now, that's what they're doing. And they're aided in that, I might add, by the Labour Party not seeking to differentiate itself from their views particularly strongly. If Labour were pulling in the other direction, then it might be more interesting. But right now, they're being encouraged just to take up that right wing space. So whether those other voices who think Rwanda is going too far have a say, we will just have to wait and see.
Do you think that the Conservative Party might be afraid of losing support to parties like Reform, that do still represent the more right-wing part of the party?
I think that might be a potential problem for them, and they might well be worried about it. I don't think at this stage it's very likely, but I've often made predictions on this program, and I've always got them wrong. So perhaps I'd better not be too certain about that.
And do you think that the taking David Cameron in, and putting him back into government, does that represent a shift for the party at all, or what do you think that speaks to?
I'm really not quite sure, because it was a great surprise to me when David Cameron came back. It could be an attempt, yes, to hark back to days when they weren't quite so toxic, because they made themselves really quite toxic in the run up to Brexit, when they really were up against the Brexit Party, which is now, if you like, morphed into the Reform Party. So it may be an attempt to play both sides. Certainly, if I were advising them, I would be advising them to play both sides, because right now they're in trouble no matter what happens. So they need to keep all options open.
Thank you so much for granting us your time. I was wondering if there was anything you wanted to say before we closed off and just wrapped up.
Well, I'd like to welcome you to the program. Been a baptism of fire. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope the viewers enjoyed it too, and we hope to see you again.
Thank you. And that rounds us up for this evening. Before I go, I just want to remind you that Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. So to everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. Our program will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. Our need to reach our £30,000 goal target to pay our bills is still pressing. Due to the generosity of our supporters, we have now raised over £22,000. However, we need to raise the remaining £8,000 urgently. Good night, and thank you for watching.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Lewis McGlynn.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Saoirse Healy.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Donald C. Stewart. Broadcasting Scotland is Scotland's independent broadcaster, providing factual news, reporting on the issues important to the people of Scotland.
We are committed to public service broadcasting, and with your support, we will produce even more programmes.
Provide opportunities for young people interested in media production and broadcasting, and challenge preconceptions of what Scottish media looks like, amplifying Scotland's voice and reflecting its communities.
We can already deliver high-quality live news, and we will create the highest quality programmes for you to enjoy, but we can only do that with your support.
So please subscribe to and share our channel or donate to Broadcasting Scotland via the link in the description. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.